Question 18. Here is some information about the times in minutes 80 teachers took to get to work. Question 18a says, on the grid, draw a cumulative frequency graph for 3 marks. Cumulative frequency is where the frequencies add each time that you move to a different data block. Assuming that you start with 0, our first block here between 0 to 20 finishes with 12 people. In the next block, moving up to 40 minutes, we have 32 people added on, which is 44. What this would mean is that between 0 and 40, we have 44 people. Between 0 and 60, we have to add another 25 people, which moves it to 69. And then between 0 and 90 minutes, we have all 80 teachers. When plotting a cumulative frequency graph, what you are looking to do is to plot these numbers at the end of the group. So between 0 and 20 minutes, there are 12 people. We don't know exactly where those 12 people are. They could all be 20, they could all be near 0. So this becomes an estimate, and this will help us later on. Be careful when you're plotting graphs on axes that are already drawn, because you have to work out what each of the little squares means. Going from 0 to 20 minutes is not a problem, but moving up the graph, we only have 5 squares to represent 10 teachers. That means that every square must be worth 2. To plot 12, we go across to the end of the group, 20 minutes, move up to 10, and then one more square to give us 12, and draw a little cross. For the next group at 40, we have to go up to 44. So 40 minutes, up to 40 and 2 small squares, draw a small cross, go across to 60, up to 69, so this is half a square below 70, and for 90 minutes, up to 80. Do make sure that you've put the crosses at the end of each group for the second mark. For the third mark, you should try to draw a neat free-handed curve with a pencil between the points. Sometimes find this very difficult to do on a computer, so I'm going to use a straight line. Now the straight line is not quite as good, as it doesn't give you a natural progression, but it does give you a very decent estimate as to the values that could lie between the crosses. Make sure that you've joined all the crosses together and started at 0, assuming that that's where the time started, and you should get your 3 marks. For question 18b, you're asked to estimate the number of teachers who took between 50 minutes and 70 minutes to travel to work. This is where your graph comes in handy. What we're going to do is use the graph to try and work out how many people took up to 70 minutes, how many people took up to 50 minutes, and the difference between that should be a good estimate for how many were between this. Now this all depends on how you've drawn your graph, of course. Your curve could have come up a little bit higher than the straight line here, in which case your numbers will differ a little bit. But please do show on your graph where you're getting your values from. For 50 minutes, we start at 50 and draw a line that goes straight up, following that line and stopping at our graph. If we then trace this across from where it touches to where it meets axes here, we get an approximation. Now notice how this line is a little bit higher than my graph. You're generally allowed to be within half a square tolerance of where it actually crosses, but try to be as accurate as possible. We'll do the same thing for 70 meters. Start on the number 70, move it up to your graph, and try and stop exactly on the line if you can, and then trace it across. Now this will give us 2 values that we can then use to try and estimate how many people lie between these 2 values. At 70, according to my graph, that's approximately 72 people. For 50 minutes, which is the orange line, we're approximately at 58. The difference between these two groups will tell us how many people lie in between these two values. 72 subtract 58, and we have 14 people. So according to this graph, as a rough approximation, there are 14 teachers who would take between 50 and 70 minutes.